Greetings. In this video, we're going to download Windows Server 2019 Essentials, set it up in VirtualBox, and then promote it to a domain controller. So we are going to use the evaluation copy. So if you just search for Windows here in Google, Windows Server 2019 evaluation, we can go here. This is the correct URL. Microsoft.com, eval center, blah, blah, blah. Click on that. And I will put this link in the beneath the video as well. So we're going to use Essentials. So we'll minimize this one. Windows Server 2019 Essentials. So this evaluation is good for 180 days, also known as 6 months. Click on the download button over here. You do have to put in some information. You can make this up. Close that. So test, whatever. Just make some of these things up. You don't really need a real email address. Let's see. All right. So we do need this key right here under pre-install information. So make sure you copy this key, the product key. You will need that for the install. So I'm going to copy it in a Notepad++. And there it is. Now we're going to download the evaluation. We've already put our information in here, so just click continue. Select your language, English, then download. This is an ISO, so it's 4.3 gig. It says I've got about 6 minutes left. When this is done downloading, we will open up VirtualBox here and install this inside of VirtualBox as a new. I can go ahead and open VirtualBox here. So we're going to go to Tools and click on New, and we can go ahead and do this right now. We're going to set up a new Windows Server 2019. So go ahead and type Windows Server 2019 here. We're going to select other Windows 64-bit. You see these are the options right here. It has Windows 2016. That's okay. We'll go ahead and select other Windows 64-bit. This is the folder. I'm going to put that in. Click on Next. The recommended memory size is 512. That's not going to cut it. So we're going to bump this up to, I'm going to put mine at 4 gig or 4096. My host has 16 gig. So if you have less than 16 gig, you may want to bump this down to 2 gig or something. But that'll be okay. Click on Next. The standard hard drive size, we want to increase this from 20 gig, but we're going to create the disk now. So click on Create. We're going to use a VDI, a VirtualBox disk image. We're going to do dynamically allocated, which will only take up as much space as necessary. It's a little bit slower than fixed size, but it doesn't take up as much space. Windows Server 2019, I'm going to increase the hard drive size to 80 just to be on the safe side. I can't move that slider very well, so I'm just going to type in 80 GB. That's a little bit easier. And the folder we're going to put that in is the D folder on my computer, VMs, under the directory called Windows Server 2019 right there. It's going to create Windows Server 2019.vdi. That's the virtual disk, which is 80 gig. We dynamically allocated it, so it will not be 80 gig in size, but it will grow up to 80 gig. All right, so the ISO has finished downloading. The next step is to boot off of the ISO, boot this environment here, which is what we set up. All we've really configured is the environment, and let's just walk through these settings to make sure it's appropriate. We called it Windows Server 2019. we specified the other Windows 64-bit, which caused a couple issues. We'll walk through those though. Our base RAM is 4 gig. That's good. Our video memory, however, is only 18 meg. That is not going to cut it. So we'll go back and fix that. Our hard drive, it says it's an IDE primary of 80 gig. That's what we configured for the hard drive. We're using NAT. We're using the VirtualBox default NAT. So let's look at these settings real quick. We certainly need to change the display. Let's bump this up to 128 meg, and let's change this to this graphics controller to SVGA, VBox SVGA. And the reason these defaulted to this is because we selected the other Windows 64-bit. If we had selected Windows Server 2019, these would have been okay. Let's click on Start. So we need to browse now to where that ISO is. Click on that. We'll start this. Now VirtualBox is booting off of that ISO. So it'll take a while to walk through this install here. We'll walk through this though, and then we'll set it up as a domain controller. So here we are, Windows Server 2019. We're doing English and English. We're going to install. Here's where you need to paste that key. This is the activation key. I ask you to copy from the pre-installed directory on the site, and we can't paste it here, so we have to type it in, which is a little bit frustrating, but it's okay. So let's type that in. And if you forgot where that is, it's right here on the eval page under pre-install information. This is the key we copied. Accept the license agreement. Click on Next. Let's choose Custom Install. We're not updating something, so we're going to do a custom. Drive 0 is fine. We'll let this configure drive 0 for us. This step here will take a little bit of time, especially this part right here. So I'll pause the video, then we'll come back when this is near completed. All right, now that we're at the next step here, it asks us for a password for the administrator account. So let's go ahead and put in a password. It's going to enforce some ridiculous complexity requirements, so make sure it's, super secure. Click on Finish. So we're in VirtualBox. So I'm going to hit the Home key, which is the right control, and then Delete, which sends a Control-Alt-Delete to the virtual machine. I'm going to log on here with the super secure password I configured. It'll take a second. Let's see if that would scale properly. There we go. So you can hit Control C, the right Control C, and it will scale the screen a little bit to make it easier to read for now. Looks like it's coming up all right. It's taking its time. Close this. If you gave it less resources, like less RAM, and your computer is a little bit slower, this may take longer to come up. So now that it has come up, let's do a couple things. We'll check on it here. It's still coming up a little bit. Looks like we have internet access. I'm going to click No here. So let's go to the Start button, and we'll go over here to Server Manager. And when this comes up, we'll take a look at how it's configured. We're going to change the role to be a domain controller. We'll go ahead and close that message there, but you could manage this with Windows Admin Center. Add roles and features. This is the wizard. It'll walk us through this wizard here. Click on Next. Role-based or feature-based install. Next. This machine. And right here, we notice that the only thing checked is storage services. So we want to make this a domain controller. So we're going to click on Active Directory Domain Services, which automatically adds a few other things here. Add features. We're also going to choose DNS. Add features. You do get a warning. This system does not have a static IP address because it is getting the IP address from VirtualBox. That's okay. We'll continue. But typically for a DNS server, you want it to have a static IP address. We can change that later, but this is just a demonstration. Next. This is fine. We are going to do some stuff with group policy management later. Next, 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 and we can restart after it's required. We'll just click on install though. This will take a few minutes here. I'll pause the video, then we'll come back, and it'll walk us through how we're going to configure this. So hang tight. Here, just expand it. This is what we just completed. We added Active Directory Domain Services, DNS, and a few other items. If you recall, it asked us if we wanted to restart. So Windows likes to restart all the time. So before we move on to the post-deployment configuration, we need to restart the machine. Otherwise, this will fail and we'll get an error. So let's restart. When it restarts, we'll move on to promoting this as a domain controller. All we've done so far have added these features. But as you see right here, additional steps are required to make this machine a domain controller. So let's restart. If you don't trust me about the restart, you can try to add it as a domain controller right now and you will get an error. So we'll go ahead and do the Windows reboot here. Let's just update and restart. So this will take a second. Whatever. I'll go ahead and pause the video. All right, it has restarted. Let's log in. So right control delete. Maybe right control delete. There it goes. So to recap, what we've done so far is add the directory services. We still need to promote this to a domain controller. Right now, it is not a domain controller. Server manager. We still need to promote this machine to a domain controller. All we have done so far is install directory services. We don't need to see this message again. So we have the warning message here. We can click on this notification, which tells you we haven't completed the Active Directory Domain Services configuration, that we still have to promote this to a domain controller. You could also get to the same spot over here under ADDS, Active Directory Domain or Directory Services. Sorry, Active Directory Domain Services. So we'll click on Promote the server to a domain controller. We're going to add a new forest. We don't have any domains already set up. This will be the very first domain. So add new forest. If this line ever stops, there we go. We'll come up with a cool root domain. Let's say I love cats.local. This will be a internal domain. Next. So as far as the functional level, it defaults to 2016, and you want to keep this at the highest level possible or latest server version. If we end up changing this to Windows Server 2008, it will make Active Directory backwards compatible with this version here, which removes some of the security features. So let's leave it at 2016. And in general, if you have older domain controllers, you want to update those to the latest version so you have the most secure Active Directory domain as possible. We are going to use DNS, a global catalog, and we're going to make up a DSRM password, or Directory Services Restore Mode password. It tells us here delegation cannot be found. We can click on show more here. Basically, this is a warning because there is no existing DNS domain called ilovecast.local. But we're going to create that, so no big deal. Click on next. It'll take a second here, but it should default to I love cats, which is outstanding for the NetBIOS domain name here. There it is. Pretty cool. Click on next. These defaults are fine. I rarely see anybody change those. This is just a review of what we've already selected, all the options we chose. Click on next. This will take a little bit of time, and when we're done here, we're going to have to reboot again. I know, it's just quite a surprise. We have to reboot the Windows server quite a bit. Here we go. Install. And this is, we'll get a few messages here. We do have a dynamically assigned IP address, so we'll get a couple warnings. That's no big deal. We can always statically assign it later, but this is a test environment, so it doesn't really matter. Operationally, you certainly do not want your domain controller and DNS server to have a dynamic IP address. That would be problematic. So we'll give this a little bit of time to complete. All right, the reboot has finally finished, so let's log in. Right control, delete. You notice that it's different now. We used to just have administrator. That was a local admin account. Now we have ilovecats/administrator, /administrator. So this is the domain admin account. So let's log on here and check out the domain. So we should have a domain set up at this point. We did configure it to run DNS. So let's do a couple checks. Let's go to Windows Admin Tools. We have Active Directory Administrative Center, Active Directory Domains and Trust. Let's look at a couple things here. Let's scroll down and look at DNS first. And then we'll go back and look at the Active Directory stuff. So we set this computer up, which has this silly name right here. We could rename this later and reboot. Of course, we'd have to reboot again. Let's look at our forward lookup zone, though. If you recall from our setup, we had to configure this domain, ilovecats.local, on this server as the primary DNS server. There was no existing domain for ilovecats.local. It actually looked for that. It was pretty sad that nobody else has picked this domain. I'm just kidding. So anyway, this is the domain controller, and we can look at the domain properties here. So we're looking at before we just looked at the properties for the server. Now we're looking at the properties for ilovecats.local. It is an Active Directory integrated domain. That means when a computer is part of Active Directory, it's going to be part of this domain. The start of authority is this server right here, which is the server we're on. It should be the same name as this over here. That's the primary domain name server for this domain. Shows us that here as well. We can add a secondary one later. Zone transfers. We don't have a secondary or anything else, so we're not going to allow any zone transfers. So that's DNS. Active Directory, we'll just do a quick check on that. So let's go back to Windows, Admin Tools, Active Directory, Users and Computers. Right here we see the domain, ilovecats.local. We can expand this. We can expand users. And we've got a few groups already configured. We did log on with the administrator account, but we can add another user in here if we'd like to. We can right click, new user, and we can also do a new group if you want to. Ideally, you put your users in groups. We'll just do a test user here. We'll call this Little Bub, our favorite cat. I think we should probably do Little Bub. I don't know if Little Bub has a middle initial. So Little Bub at ilovecats.local. Next, what's the password for Little Bub? So we'll make up a cool password here for Little Bub. There we go. And look what I got here, that warning about the password complexity. So I didn't make it a complex password. I actually made it I hate dogs. Apparently that's not complex enough. So we'll make up a cool complex password here. And then to validate Active Directory is working properly, let's see if we can log off here and log on as Little Bub. Whoop, sorry, didn't mean to do that. Close this. We will go here. We don't want to shut down. We actually want to go to this thing and sign out. And then we'll sign in, Control Delete as other user, Little Bub, in our super complex password, which is not I hate dogs. Let's try it again. And you notice we get an error message here, which is what we want to get. This is because Little Bub is a normal user, which should not be allowed to sign in to a domain controller. So let's go see if we can change that real quick, just to validate it is working as designed. Normally, you don't want your users logging on to a domain controller. You want them to be able to log on to the Active Directory domain in order to do their work, but not a domain controller, because that increases your risk. So now that we're up here, let's go back and check out the domain settings, Windows Admin Tools, Active Directory Users and Computers, and let's just confirm what group Little Bub is in. And then we'll change Little Bub to a different group and validate it's working. We already know Active Directory is working. This is just one more test. Here we go. So Little Bub, double click on Little Bub. Little Bub is a member of domain users. Domain users cannot log on to a domain controller by default. So let's add a group for Little Bub. We'll make Little Bub, since Little Bub is pretty cool, a domain admin. So check the name, fills in domain admins. Apply, okay. We'll go back and log out. And we'll see if we can log in as sign out as Little Bub to the domain. Other user, Little Bub. Whoop, you gotta spell Little Bub right. I wonder if Little Bub is related to Little Wayne or Little John. All right, so our super cool and complex password here. And look at that. We can log in to the domain controller as a domain admin, but not as a normal user. Pretty cool. So we know Active Directory is working. We actually tested one of the security features of Active Directory. If you have any questions or comments, You can leave them beneath the video. We're going to close the video right here. We'll add some more videos later. This video kind of drew on a little bit, but I wanted to show you how to set up Active Directory and how to install Windows Server 2019 Essentials in VirtualBox. Talk to you later. Ciao.